Welcome back to another episode. Now, I've been told by you guys that you enjoyed the variety of topics on my show, which honestly to me is great because it really allows me to do any sort of video that I want to do. You see, I'm a pretty spontaneous person. I don't really plan out my videos in advance. I just do really whatever I want to do. If there's a topic I want to do for this week, I'll do it. If I don't want to do it, then I'm just not going to do it. So I guess then we should continue our zigzagging through time. Last time we talked about ancient Greece. So how about this week we talk about something that happened maybe less than 20 years ago? There was a very interesting thing that happened 17 years ago. People were kind of crazy. They weren't thinking straight and there was no common sense. They call it the dot-com bubble, and that's the topic of this week's episode. Welcome to Vlogs of Knowledge. The dot-com bubble is a very interesting phenomenon that happened at the turn of the millennium. Simply put, it was a big stock market crash in which a lot of people lost a lot of money. I'm going to first spend some time talking about what happened so that you get a general idea of the events that took place, but then I also want to go back and dive a little deeper and look at why this happened, because there's something very interesting that was going on. People normally shouldn't behave like this, yet they did. But as always, let's put all this in historical context and get some background. The internet that we all know, love, and use every single day has been around for a few decades now. Like, its history can be traced back to the 1950s, but it really wasn't popular until the mid-1990s. Before that, it was mostly used on colleges and people in the tech world, like only they knew how to use it. It wasn't until the mid-1990s when the average Joe got his hands on the internet. I think most of you guys are probably too young to remember any of this, myself included, but just think about this for a second. Imagine that you are an adult living in the year 1995. So far, you've lived all your life with mail, newspapers, and actually going to a store to buy stuff. But then comes this thing that they call the internet, which literally allows you to do all of that from the comfort of your own home. But it doesn't stop there, right? Like, you can do so much more. You can download music, you can watch movies, you can chat with people on instant messaging, and you can even have your virtual mailbox to receive email. This was huge, right? Like, your whole world was changing right in front of your eyes. In fact, when a civilization reaches that point, we call that the information age. Just like we have the Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and the Iron Age, this right now is the information age. The internet was so big that it almost doesn't compare with anything in history, and I say almost because it does compare with one thing, the printing press, which we talked about in a previous video. And considering the fact that from the printing press we got the Enlightenment, the scientific revolution, and even the Renaissance, I think it's safe to say that the internet is a pretty big deal. So then the obvious question becomes, well, what happened when the internet became mainstream? How did people react? What did people do with it? Well, that's something that I find very interesting, and I'm really happy to be able to share this with you guys. But before we continue, let me ask you a question. How would you react if you had just got the internet? You're not really sure how to use it, you're not really sure what it does. Like, what would you think? What would you do with it? Well, I'm gonna take a guess here and really say that you're probably gonna use it as best as you could with really the limited knowledge that you have, and that you would probably think that this would have a huge impact on the world. Like, I mean, it was the internet, it was giving information accessible to pretty much everybody. You might even think that there are some opportunities to make some money out of it, especially if you see big companies like Google and Amazon all jumping on the internet and having their websites built up. Well, if you did that, then you would be part of the large majority of people who went through the same thought process, and from that we get the infamous dot-com bubble. This large, widespread use of the internet gave rise to an environment that would soon bankrupt a lot of Americans, but really not just Americans, but people from around the world. So now let's look at what happened. Let's look at this dot-com bubble and see why people actually went bankrupt. Like, what really happened? What went down? When you have so many people that are all going to the internet in this new environment and nobody really knows what they're doing, well, that's bound to create some opportunities. The internet was new, it was raw, and it was unknown. It was like the Wild West. There were no rules, it was chaotic, and really just every man for himself. With this new craze of the internet, a lot of successful businesses made their own websites for people to browse and even to shop online. Now, when you have all of these companies doing the exact same thing and doing it successfully, well, that's bound to attract some attention. Like, there were people who saw that and they wanted a piece of the cake too. They wanted in on the game. They wanted to have their own website too. So then you had people who weren't really interested in business, nor did they know how to run a business, how to operate a computer, or anything about coding in general, have their own online business. Like, come on. So then they built their own website, and they put a nice little .com to their name, which is why we call it the .com bubble, because all these websites ended with .com. Now, investors, they saw this large influx of people all going to the internet, and they saw an opportunity to make money, to really invest their money and to try to make more in return. They, along with the entire world, believed that the internet was going to be huge and that any business on it would explode in profits. So they invested big money in any business that had a .com to its name, even if the business was created by Joe Schmo, who knew absolutely nothing about computers. Actually, it didn't didn't even matter if the business was profitable or not. Like, as long as it had a .com to its name, it was worth investing. It was worth putting in millions of dollars. So now let me give you a little lesson on the stock market and see why this was such a big problem. You have something called an IPO, which stands for initial public offering. That's when a company wants to go public and to be traded on the stock market. Basically, it offers parts of itself in the form of stocks. So let's say that I have a company and I want to go public. I want to be traded on the stock market. I announce an IPO and I offer 1 million shares for sale. Now, technically, I can sell as many shares as I want. It's my company. But let's just say, for the sake of example, I only choose to sell 1 million. People then value my company, they value my shares, they come up with a price, and they use that price to buy my shares during the IPO. Now, to me, as a business owner, this is great. Like, I just literally made money doing nothing. I just offered ownership of my company in exchange for money. Now, I can choose to keep the 51% and only sell the 49% to the people, which lets me run the company and still get money from the stocks that people bought. That's kind of great, right? Well, if my company is profitable, then yes, that's great news. But on the other hand, if my company is not profitable, things can go wrong very fast. If my company was losing money, then that literally means that these investors, they invested in a company that was unprofitable. Like, as an investor, you should never do that. You should always invest in things that are going to get you money, not take money from you. And since most of these companies were made by people who literally had no idea what they were doing, of course these companies were very unprofitable. Investors didn't really seem to care though. They were just pouring in more and more money, even though the company was unprofitable. They were doing it because they thought that the internet was going to be the future, and they thought that these companies would eventually become profitable in the future. Eventually, like, come on, yeah, right. You see, the more people want something and the less of it there is, the more they're going to be ready to pay more for it, because they just want that thing and there's not enough of it. That's why rare things cost a lot of money. And since now, apparently, good for me, everybody wants to invest in my company, but I only have 1 million shares, my prices will go up, much higher than my IPO. But my company is still unprofitable, yet investors, they're pouring money in and they're driving my prices higher and higher. Like, what do I do? Well, I can choose to get luxurious facilities for my employees, huge end of the year bonuses, and of course many vacations around the world. Because let's face it, who actually invests their money in making their product or service better? So that's pretty much what happened. People kept investing, the prices kept going up, and it was all based on a speculation that these companies would become profitable in the future. This phenomenon is what we call a bubble. It's what happens when the stock prices are so big that they don't represent the actual earnings of the company. And what does a bubble always do? Well, it pops. And in the year 2000, after the stocks had risen by an astounding rate, everything popped, everything crashed, and people were like, oh, that's bad. The money wasn't coming in anymore, the business, well, it wasn't profitable, and everybody lost. Like, people were betting on something that, if we're being honest, did not exist. Businesses went bankrupt, investors lost their money, and the stock prices went back to their origin points. A few big companies like eBay and Amazon managed to survive, but really most didn't. The stock market was inflated, and when the bubble popped, everything went back to its original point. That's what we call a correction. That's what the stock market does. Whenever there's a bubble, it corrects itself and the prices go back to their original point. Now that we got the explanation out of the way, let's actually go back and dive a little deeper and look at why these investors were investing so much money into something that was unprofitable. Like, where was the common sense? Well, first of all, it was cheap, which meant that you could borrow money without having to pay too much interest, and you can use that money to invest. It made it really easy to invest in anything that you wanted to. But it was also this craze about the internet and how it was going to revolutionize the entire world. Like, people got excited too fast and they stopped thinking straight. When you see that in the stock market, people who are investing in internet companies are making double or triple their money, you're gonna want to do it too. And when the payoff is so big, you don't really want to listen to anybody that's gonna say, hey, maybe you should be careful, maybe you should think about your decision. Like, no, everybody's making money, I want to make some too. You would prefer to ignore that, to ignore common sense, and just hope that you're going to make a big return on your investment. Like, it's pure human greed. You want to get very rich very fast, and you're willing to ignore any sort of information that's going to break that illusion for you. And it doesn't really help when everybody around you is doing the exact same thing. Most people just went with the collective speculation that these things were going to be profitable in the future. Like, nobody really did the research, and it cost them a lot in the end. That's why on this show, I try my best to get you guys to go out and do some research on your own, because that way you'll be more educated and you'll make better decisions. And this isn't the only crash that happened. There were a lot of them that happened throughout the years. Like, just think about 2008, for example. That was a big one that affected a lot of people. And it will happen again. We're actually in a bubble right now. Like, all of these startups in Silicon Valley, they're unprofitable. Like, they're gonna crash soon enough. Like, the bubble is going to pop. The reason that I'm making this video and talking about this topic is that I want you guys to be aware that it's very easy to fall into the trap of wanting big money very quickly. And then it's very easy to overlook the details that are gonna tell you that maybe this isn't the case. Like, you just want the money, you don't want the reality that's gonna break your dreams. It's important to do your research, get some good information, and make educated decisions. And as much as you can, Try to not let your emotions cloud your judgment. Like, emotions are good, but they should never be the sole basis for any sort of decision, especially not a financial decision. Like, please trust me, making a financial decision with your emotions is possibly the worst thing that you can do. And now it's time for questions. What else do you know about the dot-com bubble? Like, is this the first time that you heard about it? And when was the first time that you got on the internet? Please do leave me a comment. I would love to answer them all. And bonus points for you, if you do leave a comment, you might get featured next week's video as a fan of the week. As you know, and as I say at the end of every video, I haven't talked about everything, and the things that I did talk about, I haven't gone into too much detail. That's okay. I'm actually doing this on purpose because I want you guys to go out and research on your own and maybe learn a thing or two. With that being said, my name has been Cosden. You can follow me on social media. The links will be in the description. And also make sure to check out my second channel where you get to see behind the scenes of everything that I do on this channel. Link is also in the description. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you all next week.